Hello and welcome back to the madness. My name is Erin and today we're covering The Djinn Waits 100 Years, a novel that barely contains a djinn nor a 100-year time gap. Why is it called The Djinn Waits 100 Years? I would say keep watching and you'll find out, but my lawyers have said that is considered clickbait because this video will not, in fact, explain why that novel is called that because your wonderful hostess who's running on Rage and Pepsi doesn't know either. It really feels like we put a series of buzzwords on the wall and started throwing darts while being blindfolded and simultaneously commanded to sing karaoke of Chop Suey. And yes, I know, I sound like I huff helium balloons on the regular, which might make you erroneously presume that the oldest artist I know is Taylor Swift. But I am, in fact, older than the song Chop Suey, and my favorite band is Dream Theater, so raise your expectations. Or lower them, if the oldest artist that you know is Taylor Swift, because you probably don't know who Dream Theater is, and that's fine. What I want you to do right now is go to this cool website. It's called www.youtube.com, and I want you to put in the search engine, Mike Portnoy hears Taylor Swift for the first time. Mike Portnoy is the drummer of Dream Theater, and what you're going to do is watch the drummer of my favorite band play the drums like a prog rock artist to your favorite artist, Taylor Swift. It'll be so cool and fun. And once you think Dream Theater is cool and fun, we can bond over 10-minute songs, which I'm low-key that Taylor Swift did because it's bringing 10-minute songs into the mainstream. And my favorite song, which is by Dream Theater, is 10 minutes and 11 seconds. It would be really cool if someone was willing to sit through it because Last Not Forgotten's a really good song and the cowbell goes really fucking hard. Don't do it for me, guys. Do it for the goddamn cowbell. Sorry, this has nothing to do with the Djinn Waits for 100 years anymore. We have got to find these train tracks before I start talking about how cinnamon is dangerous to put in bar soap or how many species of bats you can find in Costa Rica. Let's get into 100 Djinns of Solitude. So, Shubnam Khan, the author of the book, is a South African author, and according to her website, Khan is interested in stories about connections between human beings, the experience of womanhood, and the forming identities including Indian, Muslim, South African, and single experiences, how we process grief, make memory, and the pursuit of hope. And I think this novel perfectly captures all of those things that she set out to do. So if what Khan is interested in writing, if that's like, ooh, that sounds like me, then this is the book for you. You should pick it up and read it. I feel that as a reader, I have learned a lot about niche Indian communities this year because I also read The Covenant of Water, which was a window into the St. Thomas Christians of India, and this book, The Djinn Waits 100 Years, again, a book seemingly lacking djinns and a 100-year time gap, we get a window into South African Indian Muslim communities. I think the way that Buddhism functions as a religion has definitely skewed my perception into thinking Buddhism is all the rage in India, but statistically, the two major religions are their ethnic religion, Hinduism, about 80%, that makes sense, that's the religion of India, but following up close behind is Islam with 14%. 0.7% of people are Buddhist in India. If we round that up, both India and the United States have the same amount of Buddhists in the breakdown of the population's religions at 1%, which is 14,510,000 in India and 3,401,000 in the United States. Or, because like a true American, I will measure anything in any metric besides an actual metric, India's Buddhist population is enough to fill 3.7 Los Angeleses, where America's Buddhist population only is a measly 0.8 Los Angeles is big. So yes, they're both 1%, but that doesn't mean it's the exact same. And I don't really know why I'm giving you population statistics in the middle of a book review, but you can't say you didn't learn anything from me. Oh, what'd you learn from your little YouTube podcast thingy? I learned how to measure populations in Los Angeles, which is measuring things in sets of 3.879 million, which of course seems absolutely bonkers, because that's such a weird number to measure things, but miles are 5,280 feet, and the astronomical units are 92,960,000 miles, so maybe Erin isn't crazy measuring populations in sets of 3.879 million, and someone should really check her math because she's really bad at it. What were we talking about again? The intersection of Islam and the great country of India was a place I never found myself examining until I had read several books that were set in India, and almost all of them feature Muslim characters. That's kind of what drove me to look up the religious breakdown statistics in India. So if someone tells you fiction doesn't teach you anything, you tell them that it taught some random woman on the internet that Islam is the second most popular religion in the country of India, and about some niche Indian culture groups, and how to measure populations in Los Angeles. Dear God, where are the train tracks? Alright, according to my structure notes, we're lost somewhere on Bob's Road in bumblefuck nowhere, and we should be in the novel concept section, so when I get a signal, I'll just map quest us there. Here is our novel concept, also known as the synopsis. The stuff on the back of the book that's actually on the inside of the book jacket, unless you got a soft cover. And unfortunately, it's way more important that you know that Alex E. Harrow thinks that this book is hauntingly gorgeous than it is for you to know what the actual book is about. So if you did soft cover, good luck, babe. Note to Alex E. Harrow, I want you to know this is a joke. I like your books. I love your books, actually. I think we can both agree that your opinion on the Djinn Waits 100 years, where we lack a djinn beyond a handful of scenes, and also we lack a 100-year time gap, is secondary to the actual synopsis of the book. Anyways, what does the synopsis say? Rebecca meets the House of Spirits in this sweeping, gorgeously atmospheric novel about a ruined mansion by the sea, the djinn that haunts it, and a curious girl who unearths the tragedy that happened there 100 years previous. Akbar Manzil was once a great estate off the coast of South Africa. Now, nearly a century since it was built, it stands in ruins, an isolated boarding house for misfits seeking to forget their past and disappear into the mansion's dark corridors. Until Sana. She and her father are the latest of Akbar Manzil's long list of tenants seeking a new home after suffering a painful loss. Unlike the others who choose not to look closely into the mansion's unsettling qualities, the strange assortment of bones in the overgrown garden, the mysterious figures seeming to move sometimes at night, Sana is curious and questioning, and finds herself irresistibly drawn into the history of the mansion, to the eerie and the forgotten East Wing, home to a clutter of broken and abandoned objects, and to the locked door at its end, unopened for decades. Behind the door is a bedroom frozen in time, with faded photographs of a couple in love and a worn diary that whispers of a dark past, the long-forgotten story of a young woman named Mina, the original owner's second wife, who died there tragically 100 years ago. Watching Sana from the room shadow is a grieving djinn, an invisible spirit who once loved Mina and has haunted the mansion since her mysterious death. Obsessed with Mina's story and unaware of the creature that follows her, Sana digs into the past like fingers into a wound, awaking the memories of the house itself and dredging up the old and terrible secrets that will change the lives of everyone living and dead at Akbar Manzil. Sublime, heart-wrenching, and lyrically stunning, The Djinn Waits 100 Years is a haunting, a love story, a mystery, all entwined beautifully into one young girl's search for belonging. Okay, lords and germs, it's time for the synopsis breakdown. In one corner, we have a djinn that doesn't do anything. In the other corner, we have a lack of a 100-year time gap. Oh, look at that, John! Someone has broken into the ring and is occupying a third corner. Who is that? Get those cameras zooming in on it. By God, it's psychological horror elements. But that's not in the synopsis. Quickly, replay the synopsis with bits of context added in between. Rebecca meets House of Spirits in this sweepingly gorgeous atmospheric novel about a ruined mansion by the sea, the djinn that haunts it, and a curious girl who unearths tragedy that happened there 100 years previous. The House of Spirits is on my to be read, but I can't really say anything about it. I have read Rebecca, and I am unfortunately not a fan of that novel that spends 2 audiobook hours on a single plot point, and there are 7 plot points. So these comp titles are not selling me on this book. And if you're thinking, hey Aaron, why did you end up reading the book? Well, here's the thing. I'm actually a freak when it comes to how I manage my to be read pile. I build my TBRs a year out in advance. So I have 2 lists. The current year that I'm currently working through, and then next year's. And this is so that I can see my to be read shrink and not be perpetually unending. So the reality is that I read the synopsis a year ago. And here's the other thing. Everyone judges books by some unfair metric. Some judge it based on covers, others judge it on the quality of the writing. I judge books by their titles. If you've seen a couple of these episodes, you know that's my particular niche. If you've listened to the first part of this podcast, I think you'd start to guess that that's my particular niche. So I just sort of skim the synopsis because I can be sold on just about any story if the execution is good. It's the title that hooks me in. The other reason why the comp titles didn't scare me away is because I don't actually care about comp titles. Lords and germs in the chat, please let me know. Do you care about comp titles? Follow-up question. Has there been an actual comp title, like a real one you've seen out in the wild, that made you avoid the book? Second follow-up question. What do you think might be a comp title combination that would actually deter you from reading a book? I think my nightmare comp title combination would be Light Lark meets The Handmaid's Tale. Like, here's the thing. When we're doing this exercise of what is the worst comp title combo you can think of, the low-hanging fruit is to name a comp title of 2 books you don't jive with. But I think a really good unjivable book combo are 2 books that are so leagues apart in theme and plot, you couldn't possibly picture what that book is about. What would Light Lark meets The Handmaid's Tale be? Like a bunch of pregnant women fighting to the death to, like, get out of the country and also maybe free them of their curse. That would be an insane book, actually. Can someone write this? But let's get back to the hook, which is what we were just talking about. That's the Rebecca the Meats. We're circling back to it. It's okay, guys. Don't worry. So we're told about the crumbling mansion by the sea, a djinn in desperate need of an SSRI, a curious girl, and this 100-year time gap that doesn't actually exist. Here's the thing. I am being nitpicky on the 100-year thing because the 2 dates we're given is 1932 and 2014, which is only 82 years. We are generously rounding up, and that's just annoying. I get that the Djinn Waits 100 years sounds cool, but then actually make it 100 years. Anyways, let's move on to the next section. Akbar Manzil was once a grand estate off the coast of South Africa. Now, nearly a century since it was built, it stands in ruins, an isolated boarding house for misfits seeking to forget their past and disappear into the mansion's dark corridors. I will say that we don't really see much of a contrast between the past timeline and the present timeline, much beyond that the house is thriving in the past and crumbling in the present. And also, it is a boarding house of misfits, and this is a hot take. I wouldn't say they're very important, very entertaining, but not really important. One of my things that I struggle with this book is that 1932, there's nothing really that feels like distinctly 1932. And maybe 1932, nothing was happening in South Africa. That's a lie. Things were happening in South Africa. But the early 1940s is really easy because of that silly little war that was going on. But I don't know. I still feel like you should be able to capture, like, fully capture an era, especially if you're going to be labeling it as historical fiction, which I don't think this book should have been labeled historical fiction. Anyways, we're going to move on to the next section of the novel concept. Until Sana. She and her father are the latest of Akbar Manzil's long list of tenants, seeking a new home after suffering a painful loss. Unlike the others who choose not to look too closely at the mansion's unsettling qualities, the strange assortment of bones in the overgrown garden, the mysterious figure seeming to move sometimes at night, Sana is curious and questioning and finds herself irresistibly drawn into the history of the mansion, to the eerie and forgotten East Wing, home to a clutter of broken and abandoned objects, and to the locked door at its end, unopened for decades. This is all fairly accurate to what we see in the novel. We get a whole ass plot point in the novel. We get to see this kind of in live action almost, which I don't know. I think it might just be up for taste if you give away a whole plot point, but I can also understand that writing synopsises are really, really hard. And so I'm not necessarily put off by this, but I can also understand that if someone is like, wow, this just feels like it's spoiling the setup of the novel, it really is. That's why, I consider that if it's in the setup, it's not a spoiler. I don't consider the synopsis a spoiler, and I don't consider anything in the first chapter a spoiler, because I consider that part of the setup. I think, okay, here's the thing, hot take. I think the first 50% is the setup, and that, people will tell you that is not true. There are people who will say that it's the first 33%. Some people will say it's the first 25%. But I am very generous as a reader, where no more planted guns past the 50%. Everything has to be planted in the first 50, and everything has to go off that's supposed to go off in the last 50. Once we start getting past the 50% mark, kind of depending on the story, right? With some of it, there's more give than take. But generally, anything that's getting planted in the last, 50% of the novel feels very contrived to me. Anyways, let's get back to looking at the synopsis. Behind the locked door is a bedroom frozen in time, with faded photography of a couple in love and a worn diary that whispers of a dark past, the long-forgotten story of a young woman named Mina, the original owner's second wife, who died there tragically 100 years ago. Watching Sana from the room's shadows is a grieving Djinn, an invisible spirit who once loved Mina and has haunted the mansion since her mysterious death. Obsessed with Mina's story and unaware of the creature that follows her, Sana digs into the past like fingers into a wound, awakening the memories of the house itself and dredging up old and terrible secrets that will change the lives of everyone living and dead at Akbar Manzil. Now, all of this is fairly accurate, but if it pleases the court, I would like to address the fact that there is a distinct lack of evidence on the claim that Sana's act of discovery directly impacts the lives of the tenants in the building. I genuinely do not think you could argue a strong connection between Sana uncovering the story of Mina and the resolution of what happens to the house by the end of the story. It's so unclear that the French are no longer calling it Eau Claire, they're calling it Faux Claire. Moving on. Sublime, heart-wrenching, and lyrically stunning, The Djinn Waits 100 Years is a haunting, a love story, and a mystery all twined beautifully into one girl's search for belonging. So the first part, that's just where we're hyping up the novel with buzzwords. We are gassing it up. We're like, this is the greatest novel ever. That's fine. I do think there's some heart-wrenching parts about this novel, but none of it has to do with anything mentioned in the synopsis, which means I can't be specific about it until we cross the point of no return. There's a whole ass plot point missing from this synopsis. Like, it just fully neglects to mention, arguably, the most important thing that's happening in this novel. How many times, hold on, we're gonna count how many times the djinn is, like, just the word djinn shows up. Hold on, we're gonna count together. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it gets mentioned about 4 times. That's about as many times as it shows up in this book. And I am not kidding. This djinn is barely there. We're claiming that this book is a haunting, a love story, and a mystery. Haunting? Yes. Mystery? Also yes. Love story? I don't know if I'd call it love. Obsession, perhaps. But you might think Mina's story is a love story. That's totally fine. I'm just not fully convinced. I do think that what this novel is at its heart is about Sana's search for belonging. I did feel like that shines through most of this novel. However, the reason why I think that is not mentioned anywhere in this synopsis. The thing that Sana has to grow through, you are not prepared for what is waiting on the other side of the point of no return. The thing that Sana has to deal with to grow as a character. Because it's not that djinn. He don't do anything. So the cover, it depicts a woman in a red sari, and you can see shadowy set of hands in the veil, along with some bramble and vines at the bottom. The bramble and the shadowy hands are icons of the novel, so there's some foreshadow. It's related to the djinn. And while red saris are not relegated only to weddings in India, considering that marriage is an important plot point to this novel, I would wager that this woman on the cover is in wedding attire. So my guess is that the woman depicted in the cover is Mina, since she's the important wife in terms of plot. I suppose technically that Sana and Mina are both narrators, and they take up roughly the same amount of time and space in terms of, like, mention and theme, but the story is undoubtedly about Sana, and it's interesting that we are depicting Mina instead. I will also say, because I think I forgot to mention it later in here, that the brambles is related to the djinn. When the djinn is, like, having a good day, it rains and plants grow, except for nobody can see it, just the djinn. So what's even the point? This djinn is gonna make me start drinking gin. And speaking of not really putting focus on Sana in the cover, she's also not in the title. The djinn is, which is a tragedy because the djinn barely exists, in case you didn't know. I will beat this dead horse so bad it will be unrecognizable. The 100-year time gap also is not there. It's actually 82 years. We've got, regardless of everything, we've got a distinct lack of Sana on the front page, and I think that's quite tragic. In other editions, we get depictions of the house itself and a different title. And I'm wondering which title is the original title. But in some of the releases, the story is called The Lost Love of Akbar Manzil, and while we're still not getting any Sana representation, I think that title kind of works better, because at least this one centers Mina, which the story is also about, versus the Djinn and a century time gap, which the story is decidedly not about. But I also press in doubt about this again being a lost love. 12 Years of Djinn is giving obsession. It's giving local woman cannot seem to catch a break. Please sign my petition to rename this book Leave Mina Alone. But what cannot be denied about either of these titles, regardless of which one you like more, is that even if I question the presence of certain things, these titles are unique and unquestionably attached to the story. You couldn't paste this title onto a different novel and have it fit. There's too much context that's needed for these titles to work, and I think that's a good thing. I like that. The Djinn Waits 100 Years is itself a great title. I just wish the things in the title had more significance. Congratulations, you have made it to intermission, but don't worry, that dead horse isn't going anywhere anytime soon, mostly because it's dead. This is the time to give it a good old pause, go to the bathroom, get a drink, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or leave a like wherever you're listening. Comment below which supernatural spirit and or cryptid you'd love to uselessly haunt your house. You stand on the precipice of the point of no return. This is a critical analysis of the Djinn Waits 100 Years. Not only will the entirety of this book be spoiled, but it will be spoiled in great detail. So if you would like to figure out for yourself why I think there is a lack of Djinn content for a book that's got it in the title, now is the time to jump ship and go read the book yourself. And for those who are sticking around, get ready, because nothing I've said is really going to prepare you for what this book truly has to offer. I want to start with the prose, but unfortunately, if you want to understand anything that's going on in this book, I do suppose we have to cover the plot first. What a bother. This novel, much like Covenant of Water, is dense with anecdotes, and while I was entertained by all of these anecdotes, that does make it difficult to remember a lot of them. I'm sticking to the major plot points, but understand that there's all these little side pieces that fill in the gaps of the major plot points. You can decide for yourself if that worked in the novel or not. I have mixed feelings, okay? I don't know if they're mixed feelings. I feel like I am like muffin mix that hasn't been mixed yet. Like, you bought your box cake, you put it in, you crack your, 2 eggs, and then that's me right now. Like, nothing's been mixed together. I'm just not quite anything yet. That's how I feel. That is the exact feeling. On the one hand, I love the women that occupied the mansion in the present day timeline, which is Pinky, Zuleika, Razia Bibi, and Fancy. On the other hand, I can't really say they play much of a significant role in the major plot. And this is only more frustrating because these women show up more and have a greater story presence than the actual Djinn. The plot of this novel is that Sana and her father moved to Akbar Manzil after the death of Sana's mother from cancer. Sana is afraid of water, and the mansion is on the coast. We will find out later that her dad chose this place because her mother's final wish was to get Sana to stop being afraid of water through exposure therapy of getting her near the waves. Why, you might ask? Because women can't have flaws. They gotta be strong and without weakness. And I think this is touching more on the expectations that if women aren't flawless, they are picked apart and demeaned by society, so you have to buff out your flaws in order to appeal to the court of public opinion. I think that's what it's getting at. But I don't think Sana's mother is wrong. But being afraid of water isn't really something I think would make Sana's life harder, specifically as a woman. Also, what a bizarre final wish to bestow upon your husband. Who needs a therapist when you could just brute force it, am I right? All of this is couched in the absolute absurdity that her father never asks Sana why she's afraid of water. Dude just thinks his daughter don't got the stones to tread water and not a damn clue about the fact that Sana is haunted by her dead twin sister, and she had this hallucination where her dead twin sister nearly drowned her in the bathtub. Oh, this is the first time you're hearing about Sana's dead twin sister? Yeah, that shit wasn't in the synopsis. I'm out here in the trenches looking for Djinn lore and getting sniped by the disturbing dead twin sister whose hobbies include taking long walks on the beach and trying to murder Sana. I would argue that the dead twin sister is far more important thematically and narratively than Djinn 451 over here. Sana gets to know her fellow tenants and the owner, a man who only goes by the Doctor. I could put a Doctor Who joke right here. I realized it as I'm looking at my script, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't really have any desire to watch Doctor Who. So, if you have a joke, you put it right here. Say the joke out loud in your room. Or if you're in public, just say it out loud and maybe someone will laugh. I don't know. This man goes by the Doctor, which of course means his name reveal is going to be a plot point, because that's the only reason to be vague on names. Wow, that sounds like a criticism. That's not. That's just what tends to happen when names are obscured. I also read the novel, so I know that's what happens. Sana and the Doctor talk a lot about his mother and both of their complicated relationships with their personal mothers, because Sana is herself grappling with her mother's death, and also the fact that she wasn't a great mother. Nothing bonds two people together quite like extensive mommy issues. The Doctor is vague about the way his mother isn't getting a Mother's Day text from him, but it's so bad that she dies, and he doesn't even go home for the funeral. He regrets not making things right with her, and look. I know there are some mothers in the chat right now, and that is your worst nightmare, but listen to me. I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this. When you figure out who his mother is, you might just dance on her grave on his behalf. Just wait for it, okay? Okay? He's not a bad guy. I mean, he's kind of a bad guy, but just keep listening. So Sana explores the mansion's deeper parts, which all the other tenants refuse to do. And the Djinn is technically haunting the place, and it makes it intentionally difficult to have the energy to want to explore it. But Sana just, ignores these feelings and presses forward anyways. She's just like, what is this feeling? So sudden and new. I'm gonna ignore it and keep walking through. I'm not a theater major. I don't know what I was trying to do with that. Anyways, at best, the Djinn, why is he doing this? Because it's sad about Mina being dead. Sorry, major spoiler that the woman who lived allegedly 100 years ago is dead, but she's dead. The motives, abilities, and desires of the Djinn are not exactly clear, and that contributes to my frustration towards it. Dude, you can't just sap the energy out of people and kick around an empty tin can because the woman you obsessed over that has never acknowledged you is no longer available. Who do you think you are? Gatsby? So, Sana, she breaks into the untouched East Wing, and later the hidden room in the attic, which is Mina's room, which is where the diary is. Mina is the second wife of the old master of the house, some brosif named Akbar, and she details how she absolutely hated being in an arranged marriage with a man she barely knew of a religion she did not follow, and refused to convert to. And there's not really a concentrated effort to try and convert her after that refusal. Akbar's mother, Ami, the mother-in-law of Mina, does try to keep calling Mina by an Arabic name, but not only does Mina refuse to go by it, we never learn what the Arabic name is, which is queen behavior. In this diary and stuff, she also talks about how this hostage situation turned into love, which might have actually been Stockholm Syndrome, but everybody knows that Stockholm Syndrome was actually invented in 1973, so it's actually love and not weird at all that this random guy who's already married fell in love with a woman who sweeps his factory floors and decided to marry her for the lulz. You might be thinking, I'm just being funny when I say he married her for the lulz, but that isn't all that accurate. Akbar would call himself a free spirit, but I would call him an idiot with a bank account. And all he does is just whatever he wants, and he fell in love with Mina allegedly and only married her because her parents threatened to kick her out of the house if she refused. But that's a great way to start a marriage. Coercion is so sexy. But considering the era that the novel is written in, this is 1932, I am not surprised that it turned out this way. I'm not necessarily critiquing this as inaccurate. However, I don't know if this is a love story, guys. This feels like a hostage situation. Mina, wear purple if you need help. I think you're starting to see why I am not so convinced that Mina and Akbar have a love story. There's a lot of gray in the narrative, and I suppose that doesn't negate the love if they both ended up feeling it. I suppose there's a level of nuance I won't get simply because I'm on the outside looking in. I think real love can come from arranged marriages because, it must work to some degree. Arranged marriages are still happening in the world. I think what sours this particular experience is that Mina did not want this, and I have a lot of empathy for a woman being forced to marry a man just to keep a roof over her head. It's an unfair power dynamic to me. me. And Mina is a very strong woman who does almost walk out of the marriage, so it's not like she doesn't have agency. As I said, it's a very gray marriage match, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it. And I don't think this is a criticism. I think this plot point is really good. I just hesitate to think of this as a love story because I'm not sure if it's love or survival. But this is also the 1930s, and in that time, how many women were marrying for survival's sake alone? How many of them really felt love in the way that modern people understand love and marriage? Maybe in this era for women, love and survival were synonyms when it came to marriage. I don't necessarily know. So I mentioned that Mina is Akbar's second wife. Akbar's first wife does not like the fact that he's taking a second wife. So in Islam, men are permitted to have 1, 2, 3, or up to 4 wives at a single time as dictated by Allah in the Quran. We're specifically going to look at the Surah An-Nisa. A surah is basically a chapter in the Quran, and we're going to read the context around these passages because they do help us understand maybe how Akbar ended up marrying a woman who sweeps the floor of his factory. But again, this is just kind of theory because we never get a perspective from Akbar, so we don't necessarily really understand why he does it. We can just kind of guess. It really feels like he did it because he's like this free spirit, he does things on a whim. But another interpretation is equally important, is that there is some religious context based on his faith. So the surah reads, "Give orphans their wealth when they reach maturity, and do not exchange your worthless possessions for their valuables, nor cheat them by mixing their wealth with your own, for this would be indeed a great sin." So we can understand on a surface level that there is a religious obligation to perform charity in a wholly altruistic way. To me, the text seems to say that you shouldn't give shelter to an orphan in exchange for rent or work. You should just give them the shelter if they need it, nor should you, if you do give them shelter, consolidate yours and their assets. Think of this part sort of like living with roommates. Yes, there's stuff that you might share with your roommate, but for the most part, your stuff is your stuff and their stuff is theirs, and separated because you're two individuals who aren't going to be living together forever, and if you do mix assets too much, it will become impossible to find out what belongs to who. The next line in the surah reads, "If you fear you might fail to give orphan women their due rights, if you were to marry them, then marry other women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4. I will be the first to say and admit that this text seems confusing because it seems to say if you can't help orphan women if you marry them, then marry more women. However, the explanation texts I found explain that it's saying if you can't fulfill your obligation to orphan girls as with them just being like orphan girls, then marry them. And this other website that lets you like hover over the Arabic text for a literal translation of the words has it read like, and if you fear that you can't do justice to orphans, then marry what seems suitable to you. So the English translations are a little weird, and that's because translation is inherently assassination of the text and meaning is always lost in translation. But basically it's saying like, if you cannot care for orphan women in the way that you are religiously obligated to, then marry them. And so after that, the next line is, "But if you are afraid you will fail to maintain justice, then content yourself with one or those bondwomen in your possession. This way you are less likely to commit injustice." So this is the important line of text where if you don't think you can help orphan women in a good and meaningful way, you can marry them, but not if you can't treat all these women equally. If you can't handle having more than one wife, then you can only have one. And so it's hard for me to tell if Akbar treated both of his wives equally because we never hear the story from his side. If we were to believe the first wife, he absolutely didn't treat her the same as Mina, but the first wife thinks the mere presence of the second wife is a mistreatment. So it's pretty complicated. I do feel, though, he tolerates his first wife and loves Mina, but we don't get a perspective from him. At least I don't remember a perspective from him. So I don't necessarily think that I don't know if he really loves them equally. There are more scriptures in the Quran that detail about how men interact with plural marriages, and a lot of it has to do with ensuring that you can afford to treat all of your wives equally, which Akbar has the means to do. But for our conversation, the part that matters most is this idea that men should marry multiple women if they can't fulfill their religious charity towards them. I know the text says orphan, but it also gives the distinction between orphaned and orphaned women, and given the context of the text and the fact that Mina is not an orphan when married, that orphaned woman is synonymous with unmarried woman, but you can tell me if I'm wrong. Or if, like, it refers to orphan women, but in a more modern sense, it has come to also include unmarried women. I'm not entirely sure, but if you know, please tell me. I'd love to learn. I taught you how to measure populations in Los Angeles. You can help me out. We can presume that yes, Akbar might have fallen in love with Mina, but this also might have been equally about love as it was equally about Akbar's religious obligations of charity, which he felt like he couldn't fulfill with Mina, and therefore, since he has the means and ability to marry multiple women, he does. We know that Mina is not Muslim. I believe she's Hindu. That makes sense. That's the ethnic religion of India, and she's Indian. Islam has rules about interfaith marriages. Most religions do. And different sects of the religion have different interpretations, but I have seen an imam. An imam is like a religious leader. Different sects of Islam, imams play slightly different roles, but for the purposes of our explanation, you can understand an imam as a religious leader in Muslim communities. So I had seen an imam explain it like this. Men can marry into Abrahamic traditions, which is Islam, Judaism, Christianity, because all of these faiths worship the God of Abraham, Allah, Elohim, or God. Muslim women can only marry Muslim men because Jewish and Christian men could, in theory, compel the woman to convert out of Islam. Is this still a double standard? Yeah, because a man could also be compelled to convert out of the faith by a woman, but I'm not here to talk about the intersection of sexism and Islam. That's not what we're here for. I'll just point out that there's definitely a double standard, but that's really all I can say. There is an attempt at converting Mina, and this probably why the attempt was a little half-hearted is just this idea of the way that men have a little bit more access to women of different faiths than the other way around is probably why he was like, I'm not gonna try too hard. But I don't know. We didn't get a perspective from him, so I don't necessarily know how he feels about being a Muslim. So Akbar's first wife is an Indian woman as well. She's also Muslim. She descends from a royal line, I think it's the Mongols. Entitled is a good word to describe her, but a better word is a bitch-ass supremacist. She has fully abandoned her Indian culture in favor of British and French culture. She looks down on South Africans, her fellow Indians, and the natives of South Africa. She desperately wants to be a part of the colonial elite, and I would argue that this ego and self-importance is what directly contributes the first wife to eventually murdering Mina. To the first wife is pristine women of good bloodline, and Mina is an Indian South African. The first wife cannot imagine Mina being anything more than a sex object to Akbar, and can't even begin to entertain the idea that Akbar likes Mina because she does not see Mina as a first class. She sees Mina as a second class citizen. She doesn't really see Mina as a person because that's where her thing is. There's this funny bit though, because like sometimes the first wife and the mother-in-law are on the same team. Like they're a united front against Mina, but before Mina, they were at each other's throats because the first wife wants her house to look British. She wants British paintings and British style architecture and British chairs and all of this kind of stuff. That's what she wants. But then in the night, her mother-in-law will change everything back to Indian culture. So during the day, the first wife changes it all back to the British stuff, and then at night, the mother-in-law changes it all back, and there's this back and forth, and like, that's just so funny. I love that so much for the mother-in-law. It's like the only nice thing or funny thing or like it's like the coolest thing the mother-in-law does. Every other point she is kind of a needling bitch and needs to take a chill pill, but this moment she was so in the right. Like girl, you think these Brits think you're British? That's so cute. That's so cute that you think they think you're a person. That's adorable. Oh, sweet precious baby girl. I understand why it's a big deal for the first wife that Akbar is getting a second wife. And when you start the novel and you get to the past section, it does start in the first wife's perspective, and I did a full 180 on her because I was on her side because I was okay, she wants to embrace this part of her culture, the British. Okay, that's fine. I would also be mad if my husband, who was barely around and way more obsessed in zookeeping than me, was oh, I want a second wife. I would also be upset. But as the novel goes on, you're wow, you're actually the worst person, and I cannot actually believe that I had been capable of feeling empathy towards you, because now I no longer feel that, because you're actually the worst. Her marriage with Akbar is truly a disaster, and she probably should have divorced him and left, but I don't know what the divorce laws are in India or South Africa in vaguely 1930s. I don't even know if that was a possibility, but knowing that, like, divorce, at least in the West, was seen as, like, a really, really bad thing, I cannot imagine that it was the same in the East. I feel like it's, like, one of those, like, the way that, like, sexism is weirdly almost universal, I feel like divorce being taboo in the 20th century was also almost universal. But I could be wrong. You could tell me. We could learn things together. Anyway, so he marries this woman, Mina. Mina gets pregnant and bears a son. This sets the first wife off into a blaze of anger. She is a forest fire of anger because she's like, I just told myself they were reading poetry. I didn't think that they would be doing things that could conceive a child. Girl! Mina is his second wife. If he is a devout Muslim man, that means he has to perform marital duties. Like, it is also important in Islam to have children, like, to create families. Like, that is an important religious thing, because religion is culture, and culture is community, and communities are families. Like, girl, what did you think was gonna happen? She wasn't his mistress. She's not his mistress, that's his wife. I don't know why the first wife is shocked that the second wife is treated like a wife, and not some common whore. Honestly, it's probably because the first wife was like, I wish that woman was a common whore. She's so evil. I hate her. I mean, I love her as a character, but like, God, she's so evil. Anyways, this first wife actually prays to Allah that Mina and her child die in childbirth. She, like, begs for it. She mourns when they don't. You know, just sending up that prayer like, hey, bestie, would you mind offing the girl best friend and her bastard spawn for me? Please and thank you, XOXO Gossip Girl. So, let's talk about how the first wife murders Mina. The first wife does have a name, but she did just murder a woman in a fit of jealous rage, so, like, who even cares? But it is Jahanara, for those who do want to know. Welcome to That Didn't Happen, a fake crime podcast hosted by your ghoulish girly, Erin. On the banks of the Indian Ocean, somewhere outside the great city of Durban, South Africa, the eccentric mansion of Akbar Manzil sits dilapidated. What was once a beautiful place of splendor is now a tenant house, its story hollowed out and forgotten. But I'm here to change that. The story of the rise and fall of Akbar Manzil is a gruesome, bloody tale filled with jealousy, lions, and love. It's 1932, and tonight the first wife of Akbar will set in motion the events that will lead to the ultimate demise of Akbar's second wife, Mina. Akbar himself was an eccentric man, but who would have guessed his eclectic taste would get the woman he loved most killed? His beautiful home was also partially a zoo, as Akbar had a habit of buying random animals to prowl around his house, including monkeys and a giraffe. It was a beautiful place, something that feels so mystical. Mina's fate was sealed when Akbar found a lion to purchase and a sleazy lion tamer to help keep it in line. This lion tamer used to be a shining star of India, performing in circuses and traveling around. However, this man bore no love for his animals and would whip them into submission. When his animals began attacking others as a means of survival, the lion tamer would be fired from his circus job and be forced to take whatever jobs he could manage, often leaving because despite his talent, he could not seem to treat animals humanely. The lion tamer and Akbar were not exactly friends. Akbar threatens to fire the lion tamer when he's caught whipping the lion, building a bitter resentment from the disgraced tamer forced to work for a rich man's entertainment. The first wife of Akbar, Jahanara, has decided that enough is enough. She will get out of this country she despises and home to India with her husband and without a second wife. She writes to her family back home to send a letter falsely claiming her father has become ill and to rush home for his care. Then she goes to the stables. She uses her feminine ways and a little cash to convince the lion tamer to open the lion's cage when Mina and her child is alone in Akbar Manzil, and the lion tamer, old and bitter, takes the deal. All he has to do is open the door and never return here again. find a new job someplace else. But the first wife doesn't know that in the thickets of grass, watching with wide eyes, is her son. He has grown up to believe that Mina is a lesser woman and her child is a bastard. He is only a child, taught to hate by his jealous mother. So he won't say anything, and the death of Mina will haunt him to his final breath. Akbar tries to convince Mina to go with him to India to assist the first wife's ailing father, but Mina refuses, saying that this is something he must do for and with his first wife, and his first wife alone. Mina's humanity, her kindness towards his first wife, will be one of the things that gets her killed. Akbar, his first wife, and his 2 children board the ship and leave for India. Mina stays behind with her newborn son. The plan goes into motion. The door is unlocked. The lion escapes. It has no love for humanity, a creature so accustomed to the lion tamer. He attacks Mina, thinking she is no different than the other humans. Mina is alone and bleeding out. She flees upstairs while the lion prowls below. She cannot find anything to sew her wounds up, and out here, in isolated Akbar Manzil, there is no one to hear her pleas for help. She writes out her last words to her love Akbar, and then passes away. Days later, the townfolk check in on her, having spotted a roaming lion on the coast. Her son survives, having been rescued in time, but Mina is gone. A letter is sent to Akbar, received days before they arrive back in South Africa. He thinks Mina is playing a joke on him, because how could the woman he loved be dead? The hours turn into days, turn into weeks, before he realizes that she's dead, and he is never the same again. The last we hear about Akbar is that he takes a horse Mina loved and rides into the sea, never to be seen again. His mother Ami loses all hope in the wake of her son's death and passes away shortly thereafter. The first wife has won a Pyrrhic victory, having eliminated the threat of Mina at the cost of everyone else in her life. She bundles her children up and sets home for India, never to return to South Africa again. She and her son will have a complicated relationship that splinters as he reaches adulthood. He goes to medical school in Ireland and doesn't come home when his mother falls ill. Any last words they might have had never happens, because she is dead before he gets the chance. He never goes back to India. Instead, he returns to South Africa, to the crumbling mansion of his childhood, and buys the property, turning it into a tenant house that will one day occupy a teenager named Sana, and soon will reveal the secrets of this deathly place that I've shared with you now. Sana will converse with the owner, known only as the Doctor, not knowing that he is a part of the story she is so desperate to uncover. He is the son who watched from the thicket. And so that is the tale of Akbar Manzil and the gruesome murder that took place. Tune in to That Didn't Happen, a fake crime podcast, for more murders that never happened and never will. I would like to think that's how true crime podcasts are structured, but I wouldn't know because I don't really listen to true crime. I will point out, while all of this plotting and murdering is going on, Djinn Gatsby over here is stalking his obsession and failing to actually warn her, which is a plot hole. Why is it a plot hole? Oh my god, I'm so glad you didn't ask. So Mina is dead, and the whole story is revealed to Sana through Mina's diary and the Doctor's testament. In the end, I want to say it's Razia Bibi or Fancy that gets this fanciful vision that warns them of the impending danger that they just decide to ignore because, yeah, sure, that's what you do. And then the house is on fire. Just whoof, flames. That's the fire starting. That's not there's nothing bad with that because this is an old dilapidated house, and I would believe that a fire would just randomly start it. This building is not up to health code. If this was built in The Sims 2, when they had the fire code limit as a way to make sure you didn't put too many objects on to crash the game, it would be red. Anyways, so there's a fire, and Sana barely escapes with the help of the Djinn. That's right, with the help of the Tale of Two Djinns himself. Why this works with Sana and not Mina is beyond me, because it's not like the Djinn ever tried to improve upon the way it manifests. It just acknowledges that sometimes it can and sometimes it can't. And that is what I call boring. We could have had this whole bit where Sana is trying to get better and rid herself of her dead twin sister, and the Djinn is trying to figure out how to manifest, and they can help each other, and it would be so fun and cute, but we don't get that. We don't even get a Djinn. Back to the house fire. Before Sana is helped out, there's this final confrontation with the one and only dead twin sister, who tries to kill Sana again, saying to make her death merciful, and gets really angry when Sana would literally rather do anything else. Sana's dead twin sister says that Sana's gonna die slowly and painfully in the fire, and she just should have taken the easy way out with her dead twin sister. Her dead twin sister is such a parasite that Andrew Ryan's eyes are flashing with greed at the sight of her. She's just the worst. That is such a Bioshock deep cut that me and one other person's gonna find that funny. I hope you're out there. I hope you laugh. The only death in the house is the doctor, surprise, surprise, which sucks because Mina's son was sent a letter by the doctor asking him to show up to his house so the doctor could tell him the real story of his parents, and then also kind of be like, yeah, I literally watched my mom plot your mom's murder. Sorry. Yikes. In my defense, I was 7. But anyways, you know, doctor's dead, can't do that. But thankfully Sana is here, she knows the whole story, she tells the half-brother everything. And then the novel ends with Sana and her father deciding to go find a new place to live, deciding not to live on the coast anymore because I guess Sana's stronger now, and is no longer afraid of water. But I guess erupting a house fire and telling your dead twin sister to kick rocks and die cures you of your water phobia, but probably gives you a fire phobia. Book 2 sees Sana moving to Hawaii to live next to a volcano to get rid of her fear of fire. We'll call it the Djinn Waits 200 years. Alrighty, now that you actually know what's going on in this book, we can talk about the prose. The writing is good. I don't have too much to say about the quality of writing. That's a good thing. It shouldn't be something I notice when it's good. We're here to dive into the structure and writing choices that were made in the arrangement of the story. So as I said, there's a lot of anecdotal information that really doesn't contribute to the plot. Pinky, Zakela, Razia Bibi, and Fancy are the other tenants in the building, and while their stories are funny and interesting, they don't matter and feel like filler. I also felt this way when I read The Covenant of Water, where there are entire plot lines with characters that I could not remember for the life of me. There's just like this one guy who is this doctor that I think he trains the other doctor, and I was like, I don't remember who you are. Who are you? And that's not, when you write side anecdotes to just kind of fill out the world, you have to accept that people will forget them. Like, I barely remember anything about Zuleika. I can't really tell the difference between Razia, Bibi, and Fancy. Pinky is the only one that's really unique. The other issue that I have is that the impact these women have are minimal, mostly because the women don't really like that Sana wants to know what's happening in the house and they judge it for her all the time. There are these small moments where I think it's like Zuleika tries to teach Sana how to cook, and I think there's some missed opportunities to have the women of Akbar Manzil sort of take a motherly role that Sana never got from her own mother. It takes a village to raise a child, and I think that this is a missed moment to treat 24 Akbar Manzil as the village for Sana. I think there's a presence of this idea, it's just not fully realized, making the women of Akbar Manzil feel almost unnecessary, even if I did find them entertaining. I don't feel any loss at the prospect of Sana no longer living with these women, and I feel like I should. I feel like there should have been something that developed here, but it just didn't. Another small struggle is that in order to tell the story of the past, we fully go into scene 2 these elaborate flashbacks. We're basically telling 2 narratives in the story, and effectively an asynchronous timeline. And I you know me, I love asynchronous timelines. There's nothing inherently wrong with this structure, but how do you tell a story about discovering the past without doing it like this? The issue is that I don't know what Sana does and does not know, because she has 2 fronts of information, Mina's journal and the doctor's testament. But we get narration from Akbar's first wife, which Sana couldn't have access to at the time those parts of the story were getting told. And we get like a pop from the lion when it gets let out and attacks Mina. So there's some general confusion as to what Sana does and does not know. And before we crucify Khan for this is her debut novel, and we must bear in mind that sometimes you just gotta let your writing suffer a bit to get the story you want to tell in the best way that you can get it to be told. My favorite novel, How High We Go in the Dark, has a very strong first half, but struggles in the second half. It's by no means a perfect novel because every novel struggles somewhere. I know that the novel I wrote has plot points that feel rushed at the end because the novel needs to be finished and I don't have the space to fully write all of that out, otherwise I might double the length of the novel. Sacrifices must be made, and all things considering, not quite knowing what Sana does and does not know is very minor because the story is good. The first wife's perspectives are necessary because it's hard to understand the nuance of why why she wants to kill Mina beyond surface level jealousy. We need to see the whole situation from beginning to end to understand why she does the things she does. She's a great antagonist, and I think the story would suffer without her and her perspective. We just don't know how Sana could ever learn any of this. I mean, the Djinn could show her visions, but that means the Djinn would do something, and this novel ardently refuses to let the Djinn do anything. I understand that a lot of people in the modern age have perfectionism complexes, and they want the story to be perfect, and the opposite of perfection is done. And I think it's okay to let your story have a little plot hole is a treat. Everyone gets like a little bit of a struggle. You just get one little thing that doesn't quite make sense in your novel. Because sometimes, here's the thing, from the reader side, you're like, no, they should just fix it. But as someone with a degree in creative writing, the issue is that sometimes in order to solve this problem, it would require you to change major parts of the novel to where it might not even be the same novel if you were to go back and make all of these major changes to fix it, and by that, is that the story you want to tell at that point? Or you might be adding so much length to the novel that nobody wants to read it. Again, sometimes writing is the fact that sacrifices must be made. Especially because it's a debut novel. You have to like have a really well-paced novel to get your first novel published. Like, you can't do anything with word limit. Like, you have to be following the word limits to a T, because agents just won't even look at it if it's too many words. You have way more constraints of getting that first novel out. My hot take is that scenes that are just for characterization belong solely in the first 25% and should not exist afterwards. You get like the first 25% to be like, this is who the character is. After that, I don't want scenes that are just characterization. I want those scenes to actually do work. Technically, all scenes should be doing work, but I'm more patient with scenes that are just characterizations, almost like a cold open, because like, I get it, you need to know who the character is. So the dialogue, much like the prose, is good. I don't have much to say because good dialogue isn't something that's particularly noticeable. The narrator of the audiobook did a phenomenal job, and I very much enjoyed the experience. I do think that Pinky has the most unique voice, as she only talks in third person and never gives an explanation why, and she's like obsessed with Bollywood movies, Hollywood movies, movie stars and stuff. It's very funny and makes her unique. Zuleika is like this nihilistic woman who observes more than she acts and comments on a lot of the goings on in the house. And Razia Bibi and Fancy are almost interchangeable. I know what parts of them are their story, but I couldn't tell you one from the other, because their whole thing is like, their children got married and then got divorced, and now they hate each other. But I think the character with the most distinct voice is the first wife, Jahanara, because she is up to her elbows in superiority and has a general disdain for everyone who doesn't acclimate to British culture. She's also full of loathing and hatred because she's in South Africa. So it's really easy to tell when she's narrating, because it's always couched in this really great misery. Has this great distinction that other characters tend to lack. Like, when we get the reveal that the doctor is the woman's son, we need no further explanation as to why he severed ties with her. She is a very unpleasant woman. And, like, part of her character, it's so interesting, is that they ended up in South Africa on a honeymoon, and she's like, I'm here because my husband loves to travel and be on the sea and go places, and, like, I love that I get to brag about my Mongol lineage to everyone around me, but God, I want to go home. And then he's like, we should buy a house here, and she's like, you're shitting me. You're actually kidding me. And then he buys a house there and makes her live there, and then he gets a second wife. Like, it's the only time I'm on the side of the first wife, is that she is in this place that she does not want to be in, with a man that is perplexing her, and then he gets a second wife. I would also be mad. Not mad enough to kill someone, but divorce him, girl. Please, divorce him. Do something. Anything except for killing the second wife. Do anything but that. Oh, wow. Okay, wow, she's dead. Oh, okay. Okay, I guess that's fine. Speaking of the first wife, let's talk about atmosphere. So, atmosphere is both the physical and emotional world of the story. I want to believe the world I'm reading in, and I want to feel it too. So when I started out writing the script, I made notes that I didn't feel like we hit the historical fiction classification element, which is that it must take place in a clearly identifiable time through historical events, landmarks, and culture. And the biggest one in South Africa is that in 1932, that's an era leading up to apartheid. So we should be seeing the creation or parts of the political climate that leads to it. And at first, I didn't feel like we really saw it come to life, but when I thought more about Akbar's first wife, Jahanara, the less I became certain of it. So you will have to decide for yourself if you think that we actually have the historical fiction classification element. I still don't think we have it fully, but I do think that Jahanara's character is a product of the fact that she is living in 1932 and in South Africa. Because Jahanara kills Mina because she shares the political sentiments that would lead to the tragedy in South Africa. Mina is a Hindu Indian who's been living in South Africa, whereas Jahanara is from India, who has this royal bloodline and doesn't see herself as South African and has assimilated into Western European cultures. She cannot fathom Akbar falling in love with Mina because she sees Mina as a second-class citizen. I also think the work staff is segregated from the home, but I don't know if that's a segregation thing or a rich person thing. I think the only thing that really feels uncanny in terms of the political context in 1932 is that anti-Indian ideology is a part of South African apartheid, and I do understand that this novel is not an apartheid story, and Akbar Manzil is a fairly isolated manner, so I can understand why we're not really leaning into this historical context, but I can at least say it's disorienting. And look, I don't necessarily think a historical fiction has to include major tragedies like this if it's really not trying to say something about it. However, the Djinn Waits 100 Years does feature a character who has a lot of this internalized racism, so you would think that it would lean a little bit into these sentiments. I think this is also an issue and or limitation of historical fiction. Unless you're doing an alternate reality history like Babel by R.F. Kuang, most people are going to be looking for that classification element of historical fiction, and it's sort of there, but it's not very strong. You could tell me this story took place in 1920 or 1950, and I don't know if much would change. So I think my issue with Djinn Waits 100 Years, it shouldn't be listed in historical fiction just because it has a major section that takes place in the far past, since it doesn't seem too particularly interested in making 1932 South Africa different and distinct beyond surface level icons to make you believe it's 1932. So, to me, it just has historical fiction elements, but you could disagree. You could think that there's enough here to be historical fiction, or maybe I'm just missing, maybe someone knows more about South Africa than me and can, give me a dissertation as to how it's, really does feel like 1932 South Africa. I have no idea. But this novel is Gothic Horror. According to my boyfriend, who got his degree in literature, Gothic Horror is ultimately wanting to play on the fear unknown and the concept of haunts. This, however, cannot work with a single character. We get to see the horrors of the world, but humanity is what contrasts and grounds it. Frankenstein is horrific due to the monster, and the Frankenstein contrasting in what they've done and tried to live with. So even if we can reduce Gothic Horror to fancy house and a haunting, it's much more about the horror of what can occur in an isolated, crumbling location, but we only feel that horror when we have something in the real world to compare it to. I think Djinn 22 does a really good job in presenting the 2014 timeline and creating this sense of mania and unease about the house and its secrets, especially when you have a character like Sana who's hallucinating her dead twin sister. Gothic Horror's classification element is, therefore, a story that focuses on the horror of a haunted space that contrasts with the real world. And a haunting is a vague term here, because we don't need a literal ghost or spirit, but there typically will be some kind of presence creating a sense of unease. In Rebecca, our haunting is Rebecca. In The Monk, it's Mathilde luring Ambrosio further into acts of sin that he cannot come back from. In House of Cotton, we do have a literal ghost that follows Magnolia, but I would say the bizarre absurdity of Cotton is what's also driving the haunting forward. I do also think that some Gothic horror plays into that we don't know about the things that happen behind closed doors. Isolation is a major factor in the horror of the genre, but it's not always a physical or literal seclusion, but just the general isolation of being on private property. Think about the street you live on right now. Would you really know about the strange goings-on in any of those houses? And I mean, I do suppose there is a literal creature haunting the house of Akbar Manzil, but in all fairness, the Djinn isn't doing much more than sucking the motivation out of people to dig deeper into pushing into the house. Sana's dead twin sister spends more time haunting and pushing the narrative forward than the Djinn does. I think the Djinn takes too much space in the narrative, and it makes the novel also feel emotionally stunted. Which I know is saying a lot, because, like, Penelope has more screen time in Epic the Musical than the Djinn has page time in this book. At least, that's how it feels. But I think the Djinn, because it exists, Khan has to spend time and resources justifying its place in the plot, that we lose opportunities for other things. I don't really feel much for the doctor dying in the end, nor do I feel a sense of loss at the idea that Sana will no longer live with the women at Akbar Manzil, and I feel like I should. The emotional atmosphere is stronger in the 1932 section, but it's completely stunted in 2014. And the strongest part in 2014 is when Sana is trying to fend off her dead twin sister. The dead twin sister is an antagonist and torments Sana, and there's a general sense of fear that the dead twin sister will win. I think if we just cut out the Djinn entirely, we'd have more space to create these emotional bonds, and that we'd feel more from the story than we're getting right now. The novel concept made the promise that this book is about a girl searching for a sense of belonging, and I do find that an accurate depiction. But it's not really like Sana found her village, if that makes sense. We've already talked about the distinct lack of an emotional connection, I feel, at the loss of Sana's connections, so we're not going to go into that any further. However, her internal struggle of trying to find belonging in the world is deeply rich in theme. Sana feels somewhat abandoned by her careless mother, and she carries this like stones in her pocket. She is haunted by her dead twin sister, who seems to represent Sana's self-loathing and insecurity. Her dead twin constantly tears Sana down, and several times tries to convince her to take her own life. And in a few key moments, these hallucinations are so strong that Sana feels like her dead twin is actually trying to kill her, like when she nearly drowned Sana in the bathtub, creating her fear of water. Sana doesn't know if she belongs anywhere because it's hard to find meaning in oneself when raised by someone who doesn't care about you. She ends up searching the house for secrets because she doesn't really want to connect with children her age. When she tries, her dead twin sister mocks Sana and harasses her about it to the point where Sana doesn't make any more attempts to know kids her age. Sana isolates herself, making her a prime candidate for a Gothic horror protagonist. Part of the dead twin sister's motive is that she loathes the idea that Sana is the one that lived, and she is a contradictory creature. She attacks Sana, but also claims that she loves and protects Sana when no one else did. She claims her mother loved her more, and that's why she chose death. Her mother chose death. But also, the dead twin sister markets herself as the only one looking out for Sana. And Sana can see through most of this grandstanding, but I do really think that the contradictory nature of Sana's dead twin sister is less about her dead twin and more about her mother. A mother who says she loves her daughter but leaves her unattended in the bathtub. A woman who should protect her kid at all costs but refuses to battle her cancer diagnosis and chooses death instead. So really, the person haunting the story might physically be Sana's dead twin sister, but she's just the face of what the actual ghost is, Sana's dead mother. Because by this point, you and I both know the Djinn isn't doing much out here. The Bureau of Gothic Horror Haunts is going to fire the Djinn for a distinct lack of haunting. As you're well aware, I call bullshit on love being an important theme of this book and would rather argue that it's obsession. Akbar marries Mina, and then she is thrust into this strange life with the first wife and a mother-in-law who hates her, all for a man she barely knows and only manages to love because of her forced proximity to him. Yikes! Make no mistake, despite Mina's love for him, her life is abysmal living in Akbar Manzil with Jahanara, the first wife, and Ami, the mother-in-law. Jahanara's kids do try to hurt Mina's kids, because they think their half-brother is inferior because they hear it all the time from their mom. The first wife, the mother-in-law, and her kids get banned from an entire wing of that house, so that Mina and her son can live some semblance of peace. Is that love? Or is Mina just like the giraffe and the lion and even Jahanara herself? Just another part of Akbar's menagerie of eccentric things? Are they just all pieces in his collection? I really feel like it does. We talked about how in Islam, if you can't treat your wives both equally, then you are not permitted to have more than one wife, but maybe he is treating them equally, and he is equally not treating them like people, that they are just things that he can use to entertain with himself, and not much more. And from there is him riding off into the sea after Mina's death actually an act of love? Or is she something that he does not think that he could live without? But not in a sense that she is a person that matters to him. In a sense that he is a thing that he needs to survive, in the same way that people have life-saving medications. I struggle to believe that he sees her as a person. I think Mina loves him, but I just don't know if he sees her as anything more than one of his collections. Someone in his collection. And speaking of obsession, let's talk about that Djinn for a second. The Djinn meets Mina on the beach and instantly falls in love with her and follows her around for the remainder of the novel. It watches her die and then haunts Akbar Manzil for the next 82 years. Mina has no idea the Djinn exists. I don't think it's in love with her either. It's this strange parasocial relationship that doesn't amount to anything because they can't actually interact with each other. Mina is desired, but I don't think she's ever loved, and it really plays into the tragedy of her death. We've made it to the last section of the novel, and what better way to round out this discussion than to talk more about the Djinn and the lacks of the presence it plays in the narrative. The Djinn doesn't have a name, and all it does for the most part is mourn the death of Mina, a woman it barely knew but obsessed about. The Djinn definitely has got an altar of this woman complete with stray hairs and toenail clippings. That's not in the novel. I just think that he has that. The stray hair toenail clipping altar. Everyone's got one of those. There are, I think there's exactly 2 sightings of the Djinn. One by either Razia Bibi or Fancy, and then one by Sana at the end. In both instances, I think it's that the Djinn's sorrow about Mina is so strong that it takes the form of Mina. Razia or Fancy or whoever it was. She, has this vision and then is endlessly teased about the ghost sighting throughout the novel. But we learn that, the Djinn accidentally manifested and scared the poor woman, and it's embarrassed. Yikes. I would also be embarrassed. At the end, when the house fire happens, the Djinn takes the form of Mina and shows Sana the way through the smoke and fire, so Sana makes it out alive. But this does unfortunately feel very convenient, considering that the Djinn watches Mina die because it can't interact with her to warn her in time about the lion. Does that mean it cared less about Mina and more about Sana? Did it figure out how to manifest between there and now? We don't really know. It doesn't really feel like the Djinn went through any character development, mostly because we're not entirely sure if the Djinn started the fire or not. We learned that the fire probably started at the top of the house. That's where Mina's secret room is. But if it were the Djinn, we don't really have any answers to why it would start the fire. And I mean, the fire happening isn't bizarre. Man, as I said before, Akbar Manzil is really run down, and probably not OSHA approved or fire safe. So, I can believe that the fire started. But I don't understand why one of the women in Akbar Manzil gets this, vision, this, confusing vision of the fire that's gonna happen, and then ignore it. Because that's what you do. When you get visions, you just ignore them. Right? Prophet Cassandra? No, just Cassandra. But, did the Djinn do that? And if so, how? How did he figure out this between Mina and now? But it doesn't matter anyways, because this vision, like I said, the vision's ignored, and the fire starts and burns down with the doctor inside. And we've talked about the title, The Djinn Waits 100 Years. But waits for what? For someone to learn about Mina, but it was the one who was stopping people from learning about her. For the doctor to own up to his part in the way that she died, he was a small child. You can't hold him accountable for that. To get over this woman and go obsess over someone new, I'm not entirely sure what the Djinn is waiting for, and because it doesn't do anything. I feel like Sana's dead twin ended up occupying a lot of space that the Djinn should have been occupying. They're both creatures of the haunt, and while there are Gothic horror novels that successfully have many creatures of the haunt, the Djinn is so secondary I feel like you could take it out and the plot wouldn't change at all. Why is he here? She doesn't even go here. Especially because the title is so good, but so damn inaccurate. I think that if I had the power to name this novel, I might have called it Dead Twin in the Water, or The Women in Akbar Manzil, depending on what I wanted to have the readers focus into, because I do feel like the story is, above all else, about the women that live in Akbar Manzil, in both past and future, and the way they're affected by the men around them. Just take the Djinn out. Just take him out. We don't need the Djinn. So, even though we've covered this novel in great detail, there's still much you could gain from reading the book yourself. I think you'll be fully entertained by the women of Akbar Manzil in the 2014 timeline. And we didn't go much detail about Sana's father, And, I think that if you're reading this, the relationship with the father, that could be something you could discover yourself. So even if you just watched this episode, I still think you should pick it up. I rated it 4 stars because I did have a good time reading it. I'm just really upset how inaccurate the title is. The lack of Djinn is really disappointing, but hey, at least we got Sana's dead twin sister. She's probably one of my favorite characters next to Jahanara, the first wife of Akbar. This book had really good villains, and I think Khan should feel very proud of herself for producing some very, very good memorable villains in her debut novel. Such good villains. So I think this book for writers is a good case study on how we might have to make sacrifices to get a novel story to work. We saw this with the confusion and how the past timeline unfolded versus what Sana actually learned in the past. And while that part of the story is wonky, I do think it's the best way that it could have been done. And again, this book has great villains, so if you want to case reference some good villains, this is a good book to read. I also think this book can serve as a warning about how your story could suffer if you don't fully realize all of the characters, namely the Djinn. Art is subjective, and attempting to assert any form of objectivity onto art is a waste of time. You can't even say that good grammar is an objective must-have because there are genres where fragmentation is important and there's an audience for those genres. I think everyone wants high-quality novels. We just have a drastically different threshold for what we consider high quality. So whether or not you loved The Djinn Waits 100 Years, let me know in the comments because I would love to hear your thoughts and theories. Do you also hate the clickbait title as much as I do? I am desperate to know. Alrighty, the madness has ended, my friends, and you can go in peace.